When a billionaire single father saw a flight attendant feeding his daughter on a plane, he had no idea this stranger would shatter every wall he'd built around his heart. What happened next changed 3 lives forever, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can heal wounds we thought would never mend. Welcome to our story tonight. Stay with us until the very end to discover how love found its way through the clouds, and don't forget to comment which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel around the world. The silence was suffocating. Elliot Granger shifted in his first-class seat, the leather creaking beneath him as he glanced at his 5-year-old daughter Harper for the 100th time since takeoff. She sat perfectly still beside him, her tiny hands folded in her lap, staring out the airplane window with those haunting blue eyes that once sparkled with life. The untouched meal tray before her had long since grown cold, the apple slices browning at the edges like autumn leaves. 18 months. That's how long it had been since Sarah died, and Harper hadn't been the same since. The vibrant, chattering little girl who used to fill their Manhattan penthouse with laughter and endless questions about everything from why clouds float to whether angels really have wings. That child had vanished the day they lowered her mother into the ground. "Harper, sweetheart," Elliot whispered, his voice barely audible above the airplane's hum. "You need to eat something. We have a long day ahead of us in Tokyo." No response. Not even a blink. The business deal that awaited him in Japan was worth $300 million. The kind of merger that would cement his empire and secure Harper's future for generations to come. But sitting here now, watching his daughter fade away piece by piece, those numbers felt meaningless. What good was building an empire if he was losing the only person who mattered? Elliot's phone buzzed against his thigh. Another email from his Tokyo partners, probably wondering about last-minute contract details. He pulled it out, his thumb hovering over the screen. The blue light illuminated his face, casting sharp shadows under his eyes that hadn't seen a full night's sleep since Sarah's diagnosis. "Mr. Granger, regarding the Yamamoto Industries proposal." The words blurred together as Elliot's attention drifted back to Harper. She was so small in that oversized seat, drowning in the pink cashmere sweater her grandmother had bought her last Christmas. The one she'd insisted on wearing today because it smelled like Sarah's perfume. The sight made his chest tighten with a familiar ache. He'd tried everything. Child psychologists, grief counselors, even flying in a specialist from Switzerland who claimed to work miracles with traumatized children. Nothing worked. Harper had retreated so far into herself that sometimes Elliot wondered if she was trying to follow her mother wherever she'd gone. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and Elliot instinctively reached for Harper's hand. Her skin was cold as porcelain, and she didn't squeeze back. She never did anymore. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered some mild turbulence, so I'm turning on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Flight attendants, please prepare for service suspension." Elliot barely registered the announcement. He was lost in another email thread, his fingers flying across the screen as he tried to lose himself in quarterly projections and market analyses. Anything to avoid confronting the growing fear that he was failing as a father. That he was losing Harper, just like he'd lost Sarah, only this time it would be his fault. A gentle voice broke through his concentration. "Excuse me." Elliot looked up to find a flight attendant standing in the aisle beside their seats. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 20s, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Alina Torres, and there was something in her expression, a softness, a genuine concern, that made him pause. "I'm sorry to bother you," Alina continued, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't quite place. But I noticed your daughter hasn't touched her meal. Is there something else I could bring her, maybe something she'd find more appealing? Elliot glanced at Harper, who continued staring out the window, as if the conversation wasn't happening. She doesn't eat much these days. I appreciate the offer, but what's her name? The question caught him off guard. Most people, especially service staff, maintained professional distance. But Alina was looking at Harper with genuine interest, as if she truly wanted to know. Harper, Elliot said quietly. Her name is Harper. Alina smiled, and something about it made the air feel warmer. She moved closer to Harper's seat, lowering herself until she was at the little girl's eye level. Hi, Harper, she said softly. That's such a beautiful name. You know, I have a niece about your age, and she has the same pretty blue eyes you do. Harper's gaze flickered almost imperceptibly toward Alina, though she didn't turn her head. I bet you're wondering what those fluffy white things are outside your window. Alina continued, settling more comfortably in the aisle despite the mild turbulence. When I was little, my grandmother told me that clouds are actually where angels keep their pillows. Every time we fly through them, we're flying through heaven's bedroom. For the first time in months, Elliot saw the slightest change in Harper's expression. Her brow furrowed just a fraction, as if she was considering this information. Alina seemed to notice too, because she kept talking in that same gentle tone. Some people say angels don't exist, but I think they're wrong. I think angels are everywhere. Sometimes they look like regular people, sometimes they're invisible. But they're always watching over us, especially when we're up here in the sky, so close to where they live. My mommy is an angel. Harper whispered, her voice so quiet that Elliot almost thought he'd imagined it. But Alina heard. Her expression softened even further, and she nodded with complete seriousness. I bet she is, sweetheart. And I bet she's the most beautiful angel in heaven. Elliot felt something crack inside his chest. Harper hadn't talked about Sarah, hadn't talked at all, in over a month. He held his breath, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell Alina had cast. She used to make me pancakes. Harper continued, her voice still barely above a whisper. With little blueberries that looked like tiny planets. That sounds wonderful, Alina said, her own voice thick with emotion. What else did she make for you? Grilled cheese cut into triangles, and soup when I was sick. Harper finally turned away from the window, looking directly at Alina for the first time. But nobody makes them right anymore. They don't taste the same. Elliot's throat constricted. He'd hired the best chefs in New York, but Harper was right. Nothing tasted the same without Sarah's love seasoning every bite. Alina reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small package of crackers, the kind they served in economy class. You know what, these might not be grilled cheese, but they're made with something special. What? Harper asked, genuine curiosity flickering in her eyes. Love, Alina said simply. Every person who helped make these crackers, from the farmers who grew the wheat to the bakers who mixed the dough, they all put a little bit of love into them. And when we eat something made with love, it helps our hearts remember that we're not alone. She opened the package and held out a cracker. Would you like to try one? We can pretend it's a tiny grilled cheese sandwich. Harper hesitated, glancing at her father. Elliot nodded encouragingly, hardly daring to breathe. Slowly, carefully, Harper took the cracker and bit into it. It was such a simple act, but to Elliot it felt like watching a miracle unfold. It's good, Harper said, taking another small bite. I'm so glad, Alina replied, her smile radiant. Your mommy would be happy to see you eating, don't you think? Harper nodded, continuing to nibble at the cracker. She always said food was like hugs for your tummy. Your mommy sounds very wise. For the next 20 minutes, Alina stayed crouched in the aisle, completely ignoring the other passengers and the mild protests from her supervisor. She and Harper talked about clouds and angels, about favorite foods and silly jokes. She even convinced Harper to drink some apple juice, calling it sunshine in a cup. Elliot watched in amazement as his daughter slowly came back to life. Color returned to her cheeks, and her eyes began to sparkle with something he'd thought was lost forever. When Harper actually giggled at one of Alina's stories about a clumsy penguin, Elliot had to turn away to hide the tears streaming down his face. "You know what I think?" Alina said, glancing at her watch. "I think your mommy sent me to sit with you today. Angels have a way of making sure their little girls are taken care of, even when they can't be there in person." Harper considered this seriously, then nodded. "Are you an angel too?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Alina's eyes glistened as she reached out and gently tucked a strand of Harper's blonde hair behind her ear. "I'm just someone who believes in angels," she said softly. "And I believe your mommy is watching over you right now, feeling so proud of what a brave, beautiful girl you are." "Miss Torres." Another flight attendant appeared at the head of the aisle, tapping her watch pointedly. "We need to prepare for landing." Alina sighed and slowly stood up, her knees protesting after kneeling for so long. "I have to go help get ready for Tokyo, sweetheart. But it was so wonderful meeting you, Harper." "Wait," Harper said, grabbing Alina's hand. "Will I see you again?" The question pierced Elliot's heart. He could see the hope in his daughter's eyes, the first real hope he'd witnessed since Sarah's death. But he also saw the uncertainty in Alina's face. She was probably based out of New York or Los Angeles, and they were heading to Tokyo for 3 weeks. The chances of seeing her again were slim to none. Alina began, then looked at Elliot helplessly. Without thinking, Elliot stood up. "Actually, Miss Torres, I was wondering if I could have a word with you. Privately." Alina looked surprised but nodded. She squeezed Harper's hand gently. "I'll be right back, okay?" They moved toward the galley out of Harper's earshot. Elliot ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to find the right words. "Mr. Alina prompted. "Granger. Elliot Granger." He saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. His name was well known in business circles. "Listen, what you just did for my daughter. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. She's a special little girl." "She is," Elliot agreed. "And she's been through hell. Her mother died of cancer 18 months ago, and Harper has barely spoken since. She won't eat, won't play, won't engage with anyone. We've tried everything. Doctors, specialists, therapists. Nothing has worked." Alina's expression filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine." But just now with you she came alive again. For the first time in over a year, she was actually present. Elliot paused, knowing what he was about to ask was probably crazy. "We're staying in Tokyo for 3 weeks. I know this is highly unusual, but would you consider spending some time with us? I could arrange for you to have time off, compensate you for any inconvenience." "Mr. Granger, I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't possibly." "Please." The word came out more desperate than he'd intended. "I'm not asking for anything inappropriate. I can't bear to watch her disappear again. You reached her in a way no one else has been able to. I'll pay whatever you want, arrange whatever you need. I just need her to keep eating, keep talking. I need my daughter back." Alina was quiet for a long moment, glancing back at Harper, who was looking out the window again, but still holding the package of crackers. "I have 3 days off after we land," she said slowly. "I was planning to explore the city. Stay with us. I have a suite at the Peninsula Tokyo with plenty of space. You could have your own room, complete privacy. And I meant what I said about compensation. Name your price. It's not about money, Alina said firmly. I don't care about that. Then what? She looked at him with those warm brown eyes, and Elliot felt something shift inside his chest, something he hadn't felt since Sarah's illness began its ruthless march. I care about that little girl, Alina said simply. And if I can help her, then yes, I'll stay. Relief flooded through Elliot so powerfully that he had to steady himself against the galley wall. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. Just promise me something, Alina said, her voice serious. Don't expect miracles overnight. Grief doesn't work on a schedule, especially for children. She's going to have good days and bad days. I understand. And Mr. Granger, you need to take care of yourself too. I can see it in your eyes. You're carrying her pain on top of your own. That's not sustainable. Her words hit closer to home than he was comfortable with. He'd been so focused on fixing Harper that he'd ignored his own grief, pushing it down beneath layers of work and worry. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent into Tokyo Narita International Airport. I should get back to work, Alina said. But I'll find you after we land, okay? Elliot nodded, watching as she walked back toward Harper's seat. His daughter looked up as Alina approached, and that small smile returned to her face. I have to help everyone get ready for landing, Alina told Harper. But your daddy and I talked, and I'm going to spend some time with you in Tokyo. Would you like that? Harper's face lit up like sunrise. Really, you're not leaving? Not for a few days, Alina promised. We can explore the city together, maybe find some real grilled cheese sandwiches. And look for angels. Definitely look for angels. As the plane descended through the clouds toward Tokyo, Elliot found himself staring at the two most important people in his current world. Harper was actually chatting with Alina about the lights of the city spreading out below them, pointing excitedly at buildings and bridges. For 18 months, Elliot had felt like he was drowning in darkness, watching helplessly as his daughter slipped away from him one day at a time. But sitting here now, listening to Harper's laughter, mixing with Alina's gentle voice, he felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The wheels touched down on Japanese soil with a gentle bump, and as the plane taxied toward the gate, Elliot caught Alina's eye over Harper's head. She smiled at him, not the professional smile she'd given him earlier, but something warmer, more personal, something that made his heart beat faster, for reasons he wasn't ready to examine. Outside the airplane windows, Tokyo sparkled like a circuit board of possibilities. And for the first time in 18 months, Elliot Granger believed that maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. Harper unbuckled her seatbelt as soon as the captain turned off the seatbelt sign, bouncing slightly in her seat, with more energy than she'd shown in months. Daddy, can we go see the city? Now Alina said there might be real angels in the temples. Elliot looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw something he'd thought was lost forever. Life, joy, curiosity. The spark that made her Harper instead of just a shell of grief. Yes, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We can see the whole city. As they prepared to disembark, Elliot realized that he'd boarded this plane as a desperate father trying to save his dying daughter's spirit. But somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, everything had changed. Now he was a man who'd witnessed a miracle delivered by a flight attendant with kind eyes and an angel's touch. And as they stepped into the Tokyo terminal together, him, Harper, and Alina, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that their real journey was just beginning. The silence that had haunted them for 18 months was finally broken. And in its place was the sound of Harper's laughter, echoing through the corridors of Narita Airport, like music from heaven itself. The Peninsula Tokyo's presidential suite felt different, with Alina's presence filling its marble halls and floor-to-ceiling windows. What had been a cold, sterile space designed for business meetings and solitary dinners suddenly buzzed with life, as Harper's voice echoed off the walls, regaling Alina with stories about her favorite stuffed elephant while they unpacked in the guest room. Elliot stood in the doorway, watching his daughter arrange Alina's few belongings, as if she were preparing for a beloved aunt's extended visit. The sight made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. When was the last time Harper had cared about someone else's comfort? When was the last time she'd shown such genuine happiness? "Daddy, look!" Harper called out, holding up one of Alina's scarves. "It's the same color as the clouds we flew through." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Elliot replied, his eyes meeting Alina's over Harper's head. She looked uncertain, almost fragile in the opulent surroundings, so different from the confident flight attendant who had worked magic at 30,000 feet. "I should probably mention," Alina said quietly, smoothing down her simple black dress. "I've never stayed anywhere quite like this before." The admission made Elliot realize how this must appear to her, the billionaire businessman sweeping a working-class woman into his world of privilege and excess. But as he watched Harper curl up beside Alina on the plush velvet sofa, chattering about the lights of Tokyo twinkling beyond the windows, he knew this wasn't about money or status. This was about survival. "Harper," Elliot said gently, "why don't you show Alina the view from the balcony while I order some dinner?" "Can we get room service?" Harper asked, bouncing slightly. "I want Alina to try everything." It was such a normal request from a normal 5-year-old, but coming from Harper, it felt revolutionary. Elliot had to clear his throat before he could respond. "Of course. Whatever you want." As Harper tugged Alina toward the expansive balcony overlooking Tokyo Bay, Elliot reached for the hotel phone, his hands trembling slightly. 18 months of barely getting Harper to eat a few bites of anything, and now she wanted to try everything. The transformation was so swift, it felt like whiplash. He ordered enough food to feed a small army. Sushi, tempura, yakitori, steamed dumplings, even hamburgers and French fries, in case Harper changed her mind. As he spoke to the kitchen staff, he could hear Harper's animated voice through the open balcony doors, explaining to Alina about the different neighborhoods spread out below them. "That's where all the tall buildings touch the sky," Harper was saying. "And over there, those lights look like stars fell down to earth. Mommy used to say Tokyo was like a jewelry box turned upside down." Elliot's hand tightened on the phone receiver. Sarah had said exactly that during their honeymoon 7 years ago, when they'd stood on this very balcony planning their future together. The fact that Harper remembered that she was sharing that memory felt like a gift and a knife wound simultaneously. When he finished ordering, Elliot joined them on the balcony. The October air was crisp but not cold, carrying the scent of distant rain and the electric energy of 8 million people living their lives in the urban sprawl below. Harper was pointing out landmarks with the confidence of a tour guide, while Alina listened with genuine fascination. "You seem to know a lot about Tokyo," Alina observed, settling into one of the cushioned chairs. "Have you been here before?" Harper nodded solemnly. "Me and Mommy and Daddy came here for our last trip together, before she got too sick to travel." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow. They'd brought Harper to Tokyo 3 months before Sarah's diagnosis, back when their biggest worry was whether Harper would sleep through the long flight. Now, almost 2 years later, he was back in the same suite with his grieving daughter, and a stranger who somehow held the key to bringing her back to life. "That must have been wonderful," Alina said softly. "What was your favorite part?" The cherry blossoms, Harper replied without hesitation. They were all gone by the time we got there, but Mommy said we could imagine them. She said imagination is just another word for magic, and magic never really goes away. Alina glanced at Elliot, her eyes full of understanding. Your mommy was very wise. She was the smartest person in the whole world, Harper agreed. She knew everything about everything. She could make medicine taste like candy and scary dreams turn into good ones just by singing. For the next hour, as they waited for dinner to arrive, Harper regaled Alina with stories about Sarah. Not the sanitized, careful memories she'd shared with therapists, but real, vivid recollections that painted a picture of a woman who had loved her daughter with fierce creativity and boundless patience. She told Alina about Sarah's terrible cooking attempts that always ended with takeout pizza, about the elaborate treasure hunts Sarah would create throughout their Manhattan penthouse, about the silly songs she'd make up while braiding Harper's hair. Elliot found himself remembering things he'd buried under layers of grief and guilt. The way Sarah would dance barefoot in their kitchen while making coffee spinning around in his old Columbia t-shirts. How she'd insist on reading Harper 3 stories every night, doing different voices for each character. The morning ritual of Sarah and Harper making pancakes together every Sunday, flour in their hair and joy in their laughter. She sounds like she was an amazing mommy, Alina said, when Harper finally paused for breath. The best, Harper confirmed. But she had to go live with the angels because her body got too tired. Daddy says she's watching over us, but sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like. The admission broke something inside Elliot's chest. He'd been so focused on his own grief that he hadn't realized Harper was afraid of losing even her memories of Sarah. You know what I think? Alina said, reaching over to take Harper's small hand. I think the reason you remember so many wonderful stories about your mommy is because her voice is still inside your heart. Every time you tell someone about her, you're letting her voice speak through you. Harper considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. Really? Really. And I bet if you listen very carefully, especially when you're doing something she taught you, or something that made her happy, you can still hear her whispering how proud she is of you. A soft knock at the door interrupted them, followed by the arrival of their dinner. The hotel staff rolled in cart after cart of food, transforming the dining area into a feast that could have fed 20 people. Harper's eyes went wide at the spread, and for a moment Elliot worried they'd overdone it. But then Harper clapped her hands together and announced, Mommy always said big celebrations need big food. And just like that, what could have been overwhelming became magical. They ate cross-legged on the floor around the coffee table, Harper insisting it would be more fun than sitting at the formal dining table. Alina showed Harper how to use chopsticks properly, laughing, when the little girl managed to fling a piece of cucumber across the room. Elliot found himself relaxing for the first time in months, watching his daughter actually eat. Not just pick at her food, but really eat, trying everything, and asking for seconds of the things she liked. This is the best dinner ever, Harper declared around a mouthful of chicken teriyaki. Even better than your mommy's famous grilled cheese, Alina teased gently. Harper paused, considering seriously. Different better. Mommy's grilled cheese was love better. This is adventure better. The distinction was so perfectly Harper, so perfectly Sarah's daughter, that Elliot had to excuse himself to the kitchen for a moment to compose himself. When he returned, Harper was showing Alina how to make origami cranes with the paper napkins, her small fingers moving with surprising dexterity. Mommy taught me this, mummies, Harper explained. She said cranes carry wishes up to heaven. Every time we made one, she'd tell me to make a wish, and the crane would take it straight to good. What do you wish for? Alina asked, carefully folding her own napkin. Harper was quiet for a long moment, concentrating on getting the folds just right. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I used to wish for Mommy to come back. But she can't, can she? Alina's hands stilled on her crane. No, sweetheart, she can't. So now I wish for something else. Harper held up her completed crane, its white wings perfectly formed. I wish for the sad to stop hurting so much. And I wish for Daddy to smile real smiles again, not pretend ones. Elliot felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. All this time, while he'd been so worried about Harper's grief, she'd been watching his too, trying to take care of him in her own small way. You know what I'm going to wish for, Alina said, holding up her own crane. What? I'm going to wish that you always remember how much your mommy loved you and that you never stop believing in magic, because magic is what brought us together on that airplane. Harper beamed and carefully placed both cranes on the windowsill where they could catch the light from the city below. Do you really believe they carry wishes to heaven? I believe that love never really goes away, Alina replied. It just changes form. Maybe it becomes paper cranes, or maybe it becomes the kindness we show strangers, or maybe it becomes the courage to keep hoping, even when everything seems dark. As the evening wore on, Harper's energy finally began to flag. She curled up against Alina's side on the sofa, her head pillowed on Alina's shoulder, as they watched the lights of Tokyo twinkle like earthbound stars. Elliot sat across from them, marveling at how natural it looked, how right it felt to have Alina there. Tell me a story, Harper murmured sleepily. What kind of story? Alina asked, her fingers gently combing through Harper's blonde hair. A story about angels, but not sad ones, happy ones. Alina was quiet for a moment, then began to speak in that same gentle voice that had first captured Harper's attention on the airplane. Once upon a time, there was a little angel who lived in the clouds above a beautiful city. This angel had a very important job. She was supposed to watch over all the children in the city and make sure they knew they were loved. Harper's breathing was already growing deeper, but she made a small sound of encouragement. But this little angel was very sad, because one of the children she watched over had stopped believing in love. The little girl's mommy had gone to live in heaven, and now the little girl thought that meant love could disappear too. The angel tried everything she could think of to show the little girl that love never really goes away, but nothing seemed to work. Elliot found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story, despite himself. So the little angel did something she'd never done before, Alina continued. She came down from the clouds and disguised herself as a regular person. She got a job on an airplane, hoping that one day she might meet the sad little girl and show her that love can take many forms. Did she find her? Harper whispered, not quite asleep. She did. And when she met the little girl, the angel discovered something wonderful. The little girl hadn't really stopped believing in love. It was just hiding, waiting for the right moment to shine again. All the angel had to do was remind her that love is everywhere, in every act of kindness, in every shared meal, in every story we tell about the people we miss. And did the little girl remember? She did. And she taught the angel something important too, that sometimes the best way to heal a broken heart is to help someone else heal theirs. Harper was fully asleep now, her breathing even and peaceful. Alina continued to stroke her hair, her own eyes soft with tenderness. In the gentle light from the city below, she looked almost ethereal, like the angel from her own story. That was beautiful, Elliot said quietly. I used to tell stories like that to my niece back home, Alina replied. Before I started working for the airline, she loved tales about angels and magic. Where is home for you? Alina hesitated, her fingers stilling in Harper's hair. That's complicated. Something in her tone warned Elliot not to push, but he found himself curious about this woman who had appeared in their lives like a miracle. How long have you been a flight attendant? 3 years, since I was 26. She looked down at Harper's sleeping form. I never expected to love it as much as I do. There's something about being up in the clouds, helping people feel safe during their journeys. Most of the time it's routine. Coffee peanuts, safety demonstrations. But every once in a while you meet someone who reminds you why you're really there. To serve drinks and snacks, Elliot asked with a slight smile. To be the person someone needs at exactly the moment they need them most, Alina corrected softly. Like Harper needed someone to believe in angels today. Like you needed someone to help you remember that miracles still happen. Her words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to examine too closely. Elliot found himself studying Alina's face in the city's glow. The gentle curve of her cheek, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled, the unconscious tenderness in the way she held his daughter. I should probably get her to bed, he said finally. Alina nodded carefully, shifting so Elliot could lift Harper without waking her. As he carried his daughter to her bedroom, he was struck by how light she felt, not just physically, but emotionally. The heavy weight of despair that had clung to Harper for months seemed to have lifted, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like peace. Harper stirred slightly as he tucked her under the covers, her eyes fluttering open. Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart. Is Alina really staying? For a few days, yes. Harper smiled sleepily. Good. I like her. She makes everything feel less scary. She does, doesn't she? Daddy. Harper's voice was getting drowsy again. Do you think Mommy sent her to us? Elliot brushed a strand of hair from Harper's forehead, just like Sarah used to do. I don't know, baby. But I'm grateful she's here. Me too. Harper's eyes drifted closed. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Harper. Sweet dreams. When Elliot returned to the living room, he found Alina standing at the window gazing out at the Tokyo skyline. She'd changed into a simple sweater and jeans, looking more relaxed than she had all day. She's asleep, Alina asked without turning around. Finally, thank you for today, for everything. I know this isn't what you planned for your time off. Alina turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. Can I ask you something? Of course. What happened to you after your wife died? I can see how much Harper was affected, but what about you? The question caught him off guard. Most people focused on Harper, on the tragedy of a young child losing her mother. Few people bothered to ask about his own grief. Elliot started, then stopped. How could he explain the months of sleepless nights, the way food had lost all taste, the crushing guilt that maybe if he'd pushed harder for different doctors, different treatments, he could have saved Sarah? How could he describe the way he'd thrown himself into work, not because he was heartless, but because it was the only way to function without falling apart completely? I stopped living, he said finally. I functioned. I worked. I made sure Harper had everything she needed. But I stopped living. Alina nodded as if she understood. And now, Elliot looked toward Harper's bedroom, where his daughter was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Then he looked back at Alina, this stranger who had somehow become the most important person in their lives in the span of a single day. Now I'm remembering what it feels like to hope for something more than just getting through tomorrow. The honesty of his admission surprised them both. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around them like a soft blanket. Elliot, Alina said quietly, I need you to know that I can't stay in Tokyo forever. I have responsibilities, commitments. My whole life is built around being able to move freely to go wherever the airline needs me. I know, he replied, though the thought of her leaving already made his chest tighten with panic. But maybe we can make the most of the time we have. Alina smiled, and in that smile Elliot saw something that made his heart race. I'd like that. As they said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, Elliot realized that something fundamental had shifted in the space of a single day. The silence that had haunted their lives for 18 months had been replaced by laughter and conversation and the sound of his daughter dreaming peacefully. But more than that, the emotional numbness he'd wrapped around himself like armor was beginning to crack, letting in feelings he'd thought were buried forever. Feelings that had everything to do with a flight attendant, with kind eyes who believed in angels and made his daughter eat paper crane wishes. Lying in his king-sized bed, staring up at the ceiling, Elliot found himself thinking not about quarterly reports or merger agreements, but about the way Alina's face had lit up when Harper laughed, about the gentle authority in her voice when she'd told Harper that love that never really goes away, about the way she'd looked at him like she could see past all his walls to the man underneath. For the first time since Sarah's death, Elliot Granger fell asleep thinking about something other than loss. He fell asleep thinking about possibility. The morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows woke Elliot to a sound he hadn't heard in 18 months. Harper singing. Not the half-hearted humming she occasionally did when she thought no one was listening, but actual singing, her voice clear and sweet as she belted out a song about rainbows and butterflies. He found them in the suite's kitchen, Harper perched on a stool beside the marble island, while Alina attempted to navigate the high-end appliances. Flour dusted both of their faces, and there was what appeared to be pancake batter splattered across the granite countertop. Harper was gesticulating wildly as she sang, a wooden spoon clutched in her small fist like a microphone. And the butterflies dance in the morning light, spinning dreams of yellow bright, Harper crooned, completely oblivious to her father's presence in the doorway. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Alina said, laughing, as she tried to figure out how to work the industrial-grade mixer. Did your mommy teach you that song? No, I just made it up, Harper announced proudly. It came into my head when I woke up and saw all the sunshine. Elliot's throat tightened. Harper hadn't made up songs since before Sarah got sick. Music had been one of the first things to disappear from their lives, as if joy itself had become too painful to express. Good morning, he said softly, not wanting to startle them. Both Harper and Alina turned, and Elliot was struck by how natural they looked together, how easily they'd fallen into this domestic rhythm. Alina's hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a simple white t-shirt that belonged to the hotel's gift shop. She looked young and carefree, nothing like the polished flight attendant he'd met yesterday. Daddy. Harper launched herself from the stool, running to wrap her arms around his legs. Alina's making pancakes, real ones with blueberries, just like Mommy used to make. The comparison should have hurt. For months, any mention of Sarah's cooking had sent Harper into tears. But instead of pain, Elliot heard only excitement in his daughter's voice, as if she was finally able to remember her mother with joy instead of just sorrow. I hope you don't mind, Alina said, gesturing helplessly at the chaos surrounding her. Harper was hungry when she woke up, and she said pancakes were her favorite. But I have to admit, this kitchen is a little more sophisticated than what I'm used to. Elliot surveyed the scene. Batter everywhere, at least 3 different mixing bowls in use, and what appeared to be eggshells in the sink. It was the most beautiful mess he'd ever seen. Let me help, he said, rolling up his sleeves. For the next hour, the three of them worked together to create what Harper declared were the most perfectest pancakes in the whole wide world. Elliot found himself laughing more than he had in years as they attempted to flip pancakes that were either too big or too small, as Harper insisted on adding chocolate chips to spell out words, as Alina told increasingly ridiculous stories about her adventures with difficult kitchen appliances. One time, Alina said carefully, pouring batter into the pan, "I tried to make cookies for my neighbor's birthday, and I accidentally used salt instead of sugar. The poor woman was too polite to tell me they were inedible, so she ate 3 of them and smiled the whole time. That's like when Mommy tried to make me a birthday cake and forgot to put flour in it." Harper giggled. "It was basically chocolate soup, but she put candles in it anyway, and we ate it with spoons. Your mommy sounds like she was as adventurous in the kitchen as I am." Alina laughed. "She was terrible at cooking," Elliot said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. "But she made up for it with enthusiasm. She once tried to make Thanksgiving dinner from scratch and nearly set the kitchen on fire. We ended up ordering Chinese food and eating it off the good china." Harper clapped her hands together, and she said it was the most exotic Thanksgiving ever. They ate their imperfect pancakes on the balcony, with Harper pointing out all the interesting things she could see in the city below. The October air was crisp but warming as the sun climbed higher, and Elliot found himself watching Alina more than the view. She listened to Harper with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely delighted by his daughter's endless observations about everything from the patterns clouds made to the way the light reflected off the glass buildings. "Can we go exploring today?" Harper asked, syrup dripping down her chin. "Where would you like to explore?" Alina asked, wiping Harper's face with a napkin. "Everywhere. I want to see the temples with the angels and the gardens with the fish and the place where they make those little cakes that look like flowers." Elliot's chest tightened. Harper was describing all the places they'd visited with Sarah during their last family trip to Tokyo. For months, he'd avoided even thinking about those memories, afraid they would be too painful to bear. But Harper seemed to remember them with anticipation rather than sadness. "That sounds like a perfect day," Alina said, glancing at Elliot. "If it's okay with your daddy." "Of course," Elliot said, though something twisted in his stomach. Returning to those places with Alina felt like he was somehow betraying Sarah's memory, replacing his wife with this stranger who had appeared in their lives like a miracle. But as they prepared to leave the hotel, Harper slipping her small hand into Alina's, with complete trust, Elliot realized that this wasn't about replacement. This was about healing, about allowing joy back into their lives without dishonoring the love that had come before. Their first stop was Sensoji Temple in Asakusa, one of Tokyo's oldest and most sacred sites. Harper had been fascinated by the temple during their previous visit, convinced that angels lived in the ornate buildings with their sweeping roofs and golden decorations. As they approached the massive red gate that marked the entrance, Harper's excitement was palpable. "Do you see them?" Harper whispered to Alina, her eyes wide as she stared up at the intricate carvings. "See what, sweetheart? The angels. Mommy said they hide in the decorations, but if you look really carefully, you can spot them." Alina studied the temple gate with the same seriousness Harper was showing. "You know what, I think I do see something. Look there." She pointed to a carved figure with flowing robes. "Doesn't that look like it could be an angel?" Harper's face lit up. "Yes, and there's another one." She pointed to a different carving. "Mommy was right. They're everywhere." As they walked through the temple grounds, Harper maintained a running commentary about all the angels she could spot in the architecture. Alina played along beautifully, pointing out details Harper might have missed and asking questions that encouraged her imagination. Elliot found himself seeing the temple through fresh eyes, noticing the beauty in the carved details he'd overlooked during his previous visit. "Can we make a wish?" Harper asked when they reached the main hall, where visitors tossed coins and clapped their hands to attract the attention of the gods. "What kind of wish?" Elliot asked. Harper thought for a moment, her small face serious with concentration. "I want to wish for Mommy to know that we're okay, that we're happy again." The simplicity and maturity of the wish hit Elliot like a physical blow. For 18 months, he'd been so focused on his own grief and Harper's trauma that he hadn't considered that his daughter might be worried about Sarah, afraid that her mother was somehow sad in heaven because they were struggling on earth. "I think that's a beautiful wish," Alina said softly, crouching down to Harper's level. "And I think your mommy already knows. But wishing it will make the message even stronger." They each tossed coins and made their wishes. Harper's was spoken aloud, clear and confident. Elliot's was silent but heartfelt, a prayer for strength to be the father Harper needed for wisdom to navigate this new chapter of their lives. He didn't hear Alina's wish, but he saw the way her lips moved in what looked like a prayer, her eyes closed tight with concentration. After the temple, they wandered through the traditional shopping street that led away from the shrine. Harper was enchanted by everything. The colorful fabrics hanging outside textile shops, the elaborate displays of traditional sweets, the street performers who juggled and played music for tips. She chattered constantly, pointing out things that reminded her of stories Sarah had told her or adventures they'd had together. "Mommy bought me the prettiest hair ribbon here," Harper said, stopping in front of a shop that sold traditional accessories. "It was pink with little cherry blossoms on it. She said it made me look like a princess." "You still look like a princess," Alina said, smoothing Harper's blonde hair. "Princesses come in all styles." "Will you help me pick out something pretty for my hair?" Harper asked. "Something Mommy would have liked." Elliot watched as Alina spent 20 minutes with Harper examining every ribbon and hair ornament in the shop. She never showed impatience or hurried Harper along, instead, treating the selection process with the gravity it deserved. They finally settled on a delicate blue ribbon with tiny silver stars, simple but elegant. "It matches your eyes," Alina explained as she tied it in Harper's hair. "And stars are perfect because they're like little pieces of heaven that we can see from Earth." "So it's like Mommy is helping keep my hair pretty," Harper said with satisfaction. "Exactly like that." As they continued their exploration of the city, Elliot found himself watching Alina interact with Harper with growing amazement. She seemed to instinctively understand what his daughter needed, when to encourage her memories of Sarah, and when to gently redirect her attention to the present moment. She never tried to replace Sarah in Harper's affections, but instead helped the little girl see that loving her mother's memory didn't mean she couldn't open her heart to new people. They spent the afternoon at the east gardens of the Imperial Palace, where koi fish swam in ancient pools and carefully manicured landscapes created pockets of serenity in the bustling city. Harper was particularly fascinated by the fish, convinced that each one had a distinct personality and story. "That one there," she said, pointing to a large orange and white koi. "His name is Frederick, and he's the king of the pond. And that little golden one is his daughter, Princess Shimmer." "How can you tell?" Alina asked, settling beside Harper on the stone edge of the pond. "By the way they swim. Frederick swims in big, important circles because he has to check on everyone. But Princess Shimmer swims in little spirals because she's dancing." Alina watched the fish with renewed interest. "You're absolutely right. I can see the dance now." Elliot sat on a nearby bench, officially giving Harper and Alina space to bond, while secretly treasuring every moment of his daughter's returned imagination. This was the Harper he remembered from before Sarah's illness, creative, observant, full of stories and wonder. But there was something different too, a depth that hadn't been there before, as if grief had somehow made her more empathetic, more aware of the emotions swirling around her. "Daddy, come see," Harper called. "Princess Shimmer is showing off for Frederick." As Elliot joined them at the pond's edge, his shoulder brushed against Alina's, and he felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with his daughter's joy. For just a moment, he allowed himself to really look at Alina. The way her dark hair caught the afternoon sunlight, the gentle curve of her smile, the unconscious grace in the way she moved. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something about her presence that made everything feel more vibrant, more alive. "Earth to Daddy," Harper giggled. "You're not watching the fish." "Sorry, sweetheart," Elliot said, forcing his attention back to the pond. "Which one is Princess Shimmer again?" As Harper launched into another elaborate explanation of the fish society she'd created, Elliot caught Alina's eye over his daughter's head. There was something in her expression, a warmth and awareness that matched his own, that made his pulse quicken. For just a moment, they weren't a grieving widower and a kind stranger helping his daughter heal. They were a man and woman drawn to each other in ways that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with the inexplicable chemistry that sometimes sparks between two people. The moment passed quickly, interrupted by Harper's request to visit the famous wagashi shop she remembered from her previous trip. But as they walked through the gardens toward their next destination, Elliot found himself acutely aware of Alina's presence beside him. The way she laughed at Harper's jokes, the gentle authority in her voice when she guided them through the crowded streets, the unconscious way she reached for his arm when Harper darted ahead too quickly. The wagashi shop was a tiny jewel box of a place, its windows filled with intricate confections that looked more like miniature works of art than food. Harper pressed her nose against the glass, pointing out all the different shapes and colors, while the elderly shopkeeper smiled indulgently. "They look too pretty to eat," Harper breathed. "But they taste even better than they look," Alina promised. "Should we get a selection to try?" They spent an hour in the tiny shop sampling delicate sweets shaped like flowers and leaves, each one a perfect balance of sweetness and artistry. Harper was in heaven, describing the flavor of each confection in elaborate detail, while the shopkeeper beamed at her enthusiasm. "This one tastes like spring mornings," Harper announced, biting into a pale green sweet, shaped like a cherry blossom. "And this one," she held up a golden confection, "tastes like sunshine feels on your face." "You have quite the poet for a daughter," Alina murmured to Elliot. "She gets that from Sarah." Elliot replied automatically, then paused. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife's name without feeling like he was swallowing glass. Sarah saw beauty in everything. She could find poetry in a grocery list. "Harper has that same gift," Alina observed. "But she has something else too. Resilience. The ability to find joy even after experiencing profound loss. That's remarkable in anyone, but especially in someone so young." Her words made Elliot look at his daughter with fresh eyes. Harper was currently engaged in an animated conversation with the shopkeeper, who spoke no English, using a combination of gestures and facial expressions that had both of them laughing. When had she become so confident again? When had she started reaching out to strangers instead of shrinking away from them? "She's different with you," Elliot said quietly. "More herself than she's been in months." Alina watched Harper attempt to fold an origami crane out of a napkin while the shopkeeper demonstrated the technique. "Maybe she's just ready to be herself again. Sometimes we need permission to heal, and sometimes that permission comes from unexpected places." "Is that what you're doing, giving her permission to heal?" Alina turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I'm giving her permission to remember joy without feeling guilty about it. To love her mother's memory while still being open to new experiences and new people. She paused. The same permission you need to give yourself. The observation was gentle, but pointed, and Elliot felt something shift inside his chest. For 18 months, he'd been carrying not just his own grief, but a crushing sense of responsibility to keep Sarah's memory alive for Harper. He'd been so afraid that moving forward meant leaving Sarah behind that he'd trapped them both in a prison of perpetual mourning. I don't know how, he admitted. You start by letting yourself smile without feeling guilty about it, Alina said simply. By eating meals without counting how many Sarah will never taste. By planning for tomorrow instead of just surviving today. Before Elliot could respond, Harper bounded back to them, her face glowing with excitement. Look, I learned how to make a butterfly. She held up a small paper creation that did indeed resemble a butterfly, though one wing was noticeably larger than the other. It's beautiful, Alina said sincerely. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to put it on Mommy's pillow when we get home, Harper announced. So she knows I'm learning new things and I'm happy. The matter-of-fact way Harper spoke about communicating with her dead mother should have been heartbreaking, but instead it felt hopeful. She wasn't trying to bring Sarah back or pretend she wasn't gone. She was simply maintaining a connection that brought her comfort while still engaging fully with the present moment. As they left the shop and began walking back toward their hotel, Harper skipping ahead, while pointing out interesting things along the way, Elliot found himself thinking about what Alina had said. When was the last time he'd planned for anything beyond the next business meeting or Harper's next therapy appointment? When was the last time he'd allowed himself to imagine a future that included happiness instead of just survival? The question was still tumbling through his mind when they returned to the peninsula. Tokyo as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Harper was tired but exhilarated, chattering non-stop about everything they'd seen and done while Alina helped her sort through the small treasures they'd collected throughout the day. This was the best day ever, Harper announced as they settled in the living room. Even better than Disney World. Even better than Disney World? Elliot asked with mock amazement. That's high praise. Disney World was pretend magic, Harper explained seriously. But today was real magic. Real angels in the temple, real princesses in the pond, real butterflies made of paper. Real magic is better because it's true. Later that evening, after Harper had fallen asleep clutching her origami butterfly, Elliot found Alina on the balcony, staring out at the Tokyo skyline. She'd changed into a soft sweater and had let her hair down, and in the gentle light spilling from the suite behind them, she looked almost ethereal. Thank you, he said, joining her at the railing. For today, for everything. I haven't seen Harper this happy since before her mother died, Alina finished gently. I know. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city humming with life below them. Then Alina turned to face him, her expression serious. Elliot, I need to tell you something. I spoke to my supervisor today while you and Harper were getting ice cream. I'm supposed to fly back to New York tomorrow night. The words hit him like a physical blow. Tomorrow? But I thought, you said you had 3 days off. I do, but there's been a schedule change. They need me on a flight to London, and if I don't take it, I could lose my position entirely. Elliot felt panic rising in his chest. What if I talked to them, offered to compensate the airline for your time, arranged for another attendant to take your place? Alina shook her head. It doesn't work that way. Besides, this was always temporary. Remember, I have a life to get back to responsibilities. What about Harper? She's finally starting to heal. If you leave now, she'll keep healing, Alina said firmly. What she needed was permission to start the process, and she has that now. You both do. Elliot stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. So that's it, you're just going to disappear from our lives as suddenly as you appeared. Something flickered across Alina's face. Pain, regret, something he couldn't quite identify. I'm not disappearing, Elliot. I'm going back to my real life. This, she gestured between them. This isn't real. It's beautiful and it's healing, and it's exactly what you and Harper needed, but it's not sustainable. Why not? The question came out more desperate than he'd intended. Why can't it be real? Alina was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the balcony railing. Because we're living in a fantasy, Elliot. A grieving billionaire, his traumatized daughter, and a flight attendant playing house in a luxury hotel suite in Tokyo. What happens when we go back to New York? Do you really think I could fit into your world? Do you think your daughter should become attached to someone whose job requires being gone more often than not? Those are logistics, Elliot said, moving closer to her. They can be worked out. Can they? Alina turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What about the fact that Harper is replacing her grief for her mother with attachment to me? What about the fact that you're doing the same thing I'm not, Sarah Elliott? I can never be Sarah, and it's not fair to any of us to pretend otherwise. Her words stung because they held a grain of truth he didn't want to acknowledge. Was he simply transferring his need to protect Harper onto Alina? Was his growing attraction to her just a desperate attempt to fill the Sarah-shaped hole in his life? You're right, he said quietly. You're not Sarah. You're something else entirely. Someone who brought my daughter back from the edge of despair with nothing more than kindness and paper cranes. Someone who made me remember what it feels like to laugh, to hope, to believe that maybe our story doesn't have to end with loss. Alina's breath caught, but she didn't respond. I'm not asking you to replace Sarah, Elliot continued. I'm asking you to consider that maybe what's happening between us isn't about replacement at all. Maybe it's about addition, about building something new while still honoring what came before. Elliot, I know it's crazy, he pressed on. I know we barely know each other, but when I watch you with Harper, when I see how naturally you've become part of our lives, it doesn't feel crazy. It feels like the sanest thing that's happened to us in 18 months. Alina was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. You don't understand. I can't do this. I can't let Harper depend on me and then leave her the way her mother did. I won't do that to either of you. So don't leave, Elliot said simply. Stay. For how long? A week? A month? And then what? I have obligations, Elliot. People depending on me. A life that existed long before I met you and Harper. Tell me about that life, Elliot said. Help me understand what you're going back to that's more important than what we could build together. Alina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her composure cracking. You want to know about my life? I live in a studio apartment in Queens that I can barely afford. I send most of my paycheck to my parents in El Salvador so they can keep their restaurant from closing. I have no savings, no stability, no future, beyond hoping I don't get laid off when the airline decides to cut costs. That's my real life, Elliot. That's what I'm going back to. The pain in her voice made Elliot want to pull her into his arms, but he sensed she wasn't finished. And you want to know the worst part? Alina continued. For the past 2 days, I've been living in a dream, pretending that I could belong in your world, that a man like you could really want someone like me, that Harper could become the daughter I've always wanted, but never thought I'd have. But dreams end, Elliot. And when they do, the reality is even harder to bear. It doesn't have to be a dream, Elliot said urgently. We could make it real. I could help with your parents' restaurant with your financial situation. You could quit the airline stay in New York and be what your kept woman, your employee Harper's hired companion. Alina shook her head. Don't you see how impossible this is? I see a woman I'm falling in love with who's too proud to let me help her. Elliot shot back. The words hung in the air between them, stark and honest and terrifying. Alina stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. You don't love me, she whispered. You love what I represent. The possibility of healing, of moving on. But that's not the same thing as loving me. Isn't it? Elliot stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Then explain why my heart races every time you smile. Explain why I've spent the last 2 days watching you instead of reading my emails. Explain why the thought of you walking out of our lives feels like losing Sarah all over again. Alina's breath hitched. Elliot, don't. Don't what? Don't tell you that you've become essential to my happiness in less than 48 hours. Don't admit that when I think about the future now, I can't imagine it without you in it. Stop, Alina said, but there was no force behind the word. I can't stop, Elliot said, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. I tried to tell myself this was just about Harper, just about gratitude for what you've done for her. But it's not. It's about the way you make me feel alive again. The way you see beauty in everything, just like Sarah did, but in your own unique way. It's about how you've made me remember that love isn't finite, that opening my heart to you doesn't mean closing it to Sarah's memory. Alina closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. This is impossible. So was a flight attendant appearing in our lives at exactly the moment we needed her most, Elliot murmured. So was Harper eating and laughing and singing again after months of silence. Maybe impossible things happen more often than we think. For a moment, they stood frozen in that space between decision and action, between safety and risk. The city sparkled below them, indifferent to their struggle, while inside the suite, Harper slept peacefully, trusting that the adults in her life would somehow figure out how to keep the magic alive. Then Alina opened her eyes, and Elliot saw his own longing reflected there, along with fear and hope, and something that looked dangerously like love. If I stay, she whispered, if I even consider staying, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if this doesn't work, if I'm not what you and Harper really need, you'll let me go without trying to convince me otherwise. Promise me you won't let guilt or obligation keep me in a situation that's making everyone miserable. Elliot wanted to argue that such a scenario was impossible, that he already knew she was exactly what they needed. But the vulnerability in her voice stopped him. She was taking an enormous risk, trusting him with her heart and Harper's future. The least he could do was respect her need for an escape clause. I promise, he said solemnly. But Alina, I promise you something else too. I promise to do everything in my power to make sure you never want to leave. She smiled, then the first real smile he'd seen from her since their conversation began. That's a dangerous promise, Mr. Granger. Good thing I'm used to high-stakes negotiations, Miss Torres. As they stood there on the balcony, the city lights twinkling around them like earthbound stars, Elliot felt something shift deep in his chest. The armor of grief he'd worn for 18 months was finally cracking, letting in light and hope and the possibility of love. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out logistics and practicalities. They would have to call airlines and rearrange schedules and begin the complicated process of blending two very different lives. But tonight, they had this moment. The space between decision and action, where anything seemed possible. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Elliot Granger was looking forward to tomorrow. But tomorrow came with complications neither of them had anticipated. Elliot woke to his phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand, the display showing his assistant's number from New York. The clock read 5:47 a.m. Tokyo time, which meant it was late afternoon in Manhattan, and Jennifer would never call unless something was catastrophically wrong. "Mr. Granger," Jennifer's voice was tight with stress. "I'm so sorry to wake you, but we have a situation. The Yamamoto deal is falling apart. They're threatening to pull out entirely unless you're back in New York by tomorrow morning for an emergency board meeting." Elliot sat up in bed, his mind immediately shifting into crisis mode. The Yamamoto acquisition was worth $300 million and represented 18 months of careful negotiations. If it collapsed, it would cost his company not just the deal, but their reputation in the Asian markets. "What happened?" he asked, already calculating flight times in his head. "Someone leaked preliminary terms to the Wall Street Journal. The article makes it look like we're attempting a hostile takeover instead of a partnership. Yamamoto's board is furious, and their American investors are pressuring them to walk away before the story gets bigger." Through his bedroom door, Elliot could hear Harper's laughter echoing from the kitchen, followed by Alina's voice as she helped his daughter make breakfast. The sound that had filled him with such hope just hours ago now felt like a knife in his chest. "Book me on the next available flight to New York," he said quietly. "Already done. There's a United flight leaving Narita at noon. I've arranged for a car to pick you up at 10. Elliot closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. This was why he'd built walls around his heart after Sarah died. This was why love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every time he tried to reach for happiness, his obligations yanked him back to reality. "What about Harper and—" He paused, realizing he'd almost said "my family" when referring to Alina. "What about Harper?" "I wasn't sure about her travel arrangements," Jennifer said carefully. "Should I book her on the same flight?" Elliot looked toward the door again, hearing Harper's delighted squeal as Alina apparently helped her flip a pancake. His daughter had been transformed in the past 3 days, brought back to life by a woman who was supposed to leave today anyway. How could he tear her away from the first real joy she'd experienced in 18 months? "No," he said finally. "Book Harper on a flight tomorrow evening, and book a seat for Alina Torres as well. She'll be accompanying Harper." There was a brief pause. "Alina Torres, she's a friend, someone who's been helping with Harper while we've been in Tokyo. I'll text you her passport information." After he hung up, Elliot sat on the edge of the bed for several minutes trying to figure out how to explain to Harper that he was abandoning her again, choosing work over her happiness, just like he had so many times since Sarah's death. The sound of her laughter from the kitchen made his chest ache with guilt. He found them in the same chaotic kitchen scene as yesterday, flour everywhere, and both of them grinning as they attempted to make what appeared to be pancakes shaped like butterflies. Harper was perched on her stool, carefully drizzling batter into the pan, while Alina guided her hands. "Daddy?" Harper beamed when she saw him. "Look, I'm making flying pancakes. Alina says they taste better when they have wings." "They're beautiful, sweetheart," Elliot said, his voice rougher than he intended. Alina looked up at him, and her smile faded immediately. "What's wrong?" There was no gentle way to deliver the news, so Elliot opted for directness. "I have to go back to New York this morning. There's a business crisis that can't wait." The spatula slipped from Harper's hand, clattering onto the marble countertop. "But we were going to see the cherry blossom garden today. You promised we'd pretend the trees were still blooming." "I know, baby, and I'm so sorry. But sometimes grown-up work has emergencies that can't be ignored." Harper's face crumpled, and Elliot saw 18 months of abandonment and disappointment reflected in her blue eyes. You're leaving me again." The accusation hit him like a physical blow because it was absolutely accurate. He was leaving her again, choosing his empire over her healing, just like he'd done countless times since Sarah's death. "It's only for one day," he said desperately. "You and Alina can stay here and explore Tokyo, and tomorrow evening you'll both fly home. We'll be back together before you know it." "But what if something bad happens while you're gone?" Harper's voice was small and scared. "What if you don't come back like Mommy didn't come back?" Elliot knelt beside her stool, taking her flour-dusted hands in his. "Harper, sweetheart, I will always come back to you. This isn't like Mommy's situation. This is just work, and work problems always get solved." "You said Mommy's sick would get solved too," Harper whispered. The words shattered something inside Elliot's chest. He'd made so many promises he couldn't keep, offered so much reassurance that had proven hollow. How could he expect his 5-year-old daughter to trust him when his track record was so poor? "Harper," Alina said softly, crouching down beside Elliot. "Can I tell you something important?" Harper nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Your daddy has to go take care of something very important, something that helps him take care of you. But you know what, I'm going to stay right here with you, and we're going to have the most amazing adventure while we wait for him to come back. Promise?" Harper's voice was barely audible. "I promise," Alina said firmly. "We'll see every temple and garden in Tokyo. We'll eat so many different kinds of food that we'll need to make a book to remember them all. And we'll collect treasures to show your daddy when he gets home." Harper looked between Alina and Elliot, her small face serious with consideration. "Will you call me every hour so I know you're okay?" "Every hour," Elliot promised, relief flooding through him. "And I'll text you pictures of everything I'm doing so you can see for yourself that I'm safe." The next few hours passed in a blur of packing and logistics. Elliot arranged for his driver to stay with Alina and Harper during their extended exploration of Tokyo, transferred money to ensure they had everything they needed, and left detailed contact information for emergencies. But even as he handled the practical matters, part of his mind was spinning with larger concerns. Was this what their life would look like if Alina stayed, him racing off to handle crises while she managed Harper's emotional needs? Would she end up feeling like a glorified nanny responsible for his daughter's well-being while he disappeared into the demands of his empire? As his car arrived to take him to the airport, Harper clung to him with desperate intensity, her small arms wrapped around his neck, like she was afraid he might evaporate if she let go. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered against his ear. "Come home fast, okay? I love you too, baby girl. Be good for Alina, and I'll see you tomorrow night." Over Harper's head, his eyes met Alina's, and he saw his own conflicted emotions reflected there. This wasn't how he'd wanted to leave things between them, with uncertainty and unresolved tension hanging in the air. "We'll be fine," Alina said, though her voice was tight with strain. "Just focus on what you need to do." The flight back to New York was 13 hours of torment. Elliot tried to work reviewing contracts and financial projections, but his mind kept drifting to Harper and Alina, exploring Tokyo without him. He'd promised to text Harper every hour, and her responses painted a picture of a day filled with adventures he was missing. "We found a garden with a waterfall, and Alina says it looks like liquid diamonds. The fish in this pond are huge, and one of them smiled at me. Alina bought me a kimono that makes me look like a real Japanese princess." Each message was accompanied by photos that made his chest ache with longing. Harper looked radiant, her face glowing with joy as she posed with various Tokyo landmarks. But it was the pictures that included Alina that really undid him. The two of them feeding fish, sharing elaborate desserts, laughing at some private joke while standing beneath a traditional gate. They looked like a family. Mother and daughter exploring the world together, creating memories that would last a lifetime. And he was 30,000 feet away, racing toward a boardroom full of angry investors, because that's what his life had always demanded of him. The emergency meeting in New York was even worse than he'd anticipated. The leaked story had painted his company as predatory corporate raiders, and Yamamoto Industries was threatening not just to pull out of their deal, but to publicly condemn the acquisition attempt. The board was in full crisis mode, demanding explanations and strategies to contain the damage. 18 months of work, his lead attorney said grimly, as they prepared for the confrontation with Yamamoto's representatives. If we lose this deal, we lose our credibility in the entire Asian market. Elliot nodded, trying to focus on the legal briefs in front of him, but his phone buzzed with another message from Harper. This one was a picture of her and Alina at what appeared to be a traditional tea ceremony, both of them kneeling on tatami mats with small cups in their hands. Harper's expression was one of serious concentration as she attempted to follow proper protocol. Alina says tea ceremonies are like prayers but with better snacks. The message made him smile despite the crisis surrounding him, but it also highlighted the cruel irony of his situation. His daughter was having life-changing experiences with a woman who might become the most important person in their lives, and he was trapped in a conference room fighting to save a deal that would make him richer, but wouldn't bring him any closer to happiness. The meeting with Yamamoto's team was brutal. 3 hours of accusations, denials, and damage control, with both sides maneuvering for position while trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Elliot found himself drawing on every negotiation skill he'd developed over 15 years of building his empire, but his heart wasn't fully in it. For the first time in his career, he kept thinking about something more important than the deal at hand. Every time Yamamoto's lead negotiator made a particularly harsh demand, or his own board members started to panic, Elliot found himself wondering what Harper and Alina were doing, whether they were thinking about him, whether this crisis was worth missing even a single day of his daughter's healing process. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a tentative agreement. The deal would proceed, but with modified terms that would cost Elliot's company an additional $50 million and 6 months of delayed implementation. It was far from the victory he'd hoped for, but it salvaged the partnership and preserved their reputation in the Asian markets. "We'll need you in the office first thing Monday morning to finalize the paperwork," his attorney said, as they finally wrapped up the meeting. "This is going to require careful handling for the next several weeks." Elliot looked at his watch. It was nearly midnight in New York, which meant it was early afternoon the next day in Tokyo. Harper and Alina would be getting ready to head to the airport for their evening flight home. He'd promised to be there when they landed, but now he was looking at another week of 18-hour days to clean up this mess. "Actually," he said, surprising himself with the words, "I won't be in on Monday. I'll be available by phone and email, but I need to be with my daughter right now." His board members exchanged concerned glances. "Elliot," his CFO said carefully, "this deal needs your personal attention. We can't afford any more surprises." "Then handle it without surprises," Elliot replied, standing up from the conference table. "I pay you all very well to manage crises. Consider this an opportunity to prove you're worth your salaries." As he walked out of the boardroom, ignoring the shocked expressions of his colleagues, Elliot felt something shift inside his chest. For 15 years, he had prioritized his business above everything else, telling himself that financial success was how he protected and provided for his family. But Sarah's death had taught him that no amount of money could buy time or guarantee tomorrow, and the past 3 days with Alina and Harper had reminded him what really mattered. The flight back to Tokyo felt endless, but this time the wait was filled with anticipation rather than dread. Elliot spent the 13 hours planning everything he wanted to show Harper and Alina, thinking about conversations they needed to have and decisions that couldn't be postponed any longer. By the time the plane touched down at Narita, he knew exactly what he needed to say. He found them in the airport's first-class lounge, Harper curled up asleep in an oversized chair, while Alina sat beside her reading a book. They both looked tired, but content, surrounded by shopping bags filled with treasures from their Tokyo adventures. "Daddy?" Harper's eyes flew open the moment she sensed his presence, and she launched herself into his arms with such force that he staggered backward. "I missed you so much," she said, squeezing his neck tight enough to cut off his circulation. "Alina and I had adventures, but they weren't the same without you there." "I missed you too, sweetheart," Elliot said, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "More than you'll ever know." Over Harper's head, he met Alina's eyes. She looked uncertain, almost fragile, as if the past day had left her questioning everything they'd discussed on the hotel balcony. "How did the meeting go?" she asked quietly. "We saved the deal," Elliot replied. "But more importantly, I realized something while I was gone." "What's that?" Elliot gently set Harper down, but kept one arm around her shoulders. "I realized that I've spent the past 18 months trying to build an empire to secure Harper's future, but I've been missing out on her present. And yesterday, when I had to choose between a $300 million deal and being here with the two most important people in my life, the choice was actually easy." Alina's eyes widened. "Elliot, you can't sacrifice your career for us. That's not sustainable, and it's not fair to anyone." "I'm not sacrificing my career," he said firmly. "I'm rebalancing it. I'm choosing to be present for the moments that matter, instead of always chasing the next deal, the next acquisition, the next victory that's supposed to make everything worthwhile." Harper looked up at him with those wise blue eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah. "Does that mean you're not going to leave us anymore?" "I'm still going to have to work, sweetheart," Elliot said honestly. "But I'm going to try very hard to make sure work doesn't take me away from you unless it's absolutely necessary. And when it does, I'm going to make sure you have everything you need to be happy and safe." "Including Alina?" Harper asked with the directness that only children possess. Elliot looked at Alina, seeing the hope and fear warring in her expression. "That depends on whether Alina wants to be included." For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in the airport lounge while other travelers moved around them, focused on their own journeys and destinations. But their little bubble felt separate from all that motion, suspended in a moment where everything could change based on a single decision. "I've been thinking," Alina said slowly, "about what you said on the balcony, about addition instead of replacement. And I think maybe I was scared of letting myself believe that this could be real, that someone like you could really want someone like me, that Harper could become the daughter I've always dreamed of having." Harper perked up at this. "You want to be my other mommy?" Alina's eyes filled with tears. "I would love to be your other mommy if you'll have me. But I want you to know that I could never replace your first mommy. She'll always be special and important and part of who you are." "I know," Harper said solemnly, "but people can have more than one mommy, right? Like how some kids have stepmommies and foster mommies and grandmommies." "Right," Alina agreed, smiling through her tears. "Some kids are just lucky enough to have extra love in their lives. So I'll have mommy in heaven and Alina mommy on earth," Harper announced with satisfaction. "That makes me the luckiest girl ever." Elliot felt his own eyes burning as he watched his daughter and the woman he loved figure out how to build a family together. It wasn't the family he'd planned with Sarah, but it was beautiful in its own unique way. There's just one problem, Alina said, her expression growing serious again. What's that? Elliot asked, though he had a feeling he knew what she was going to say. I still need to work. I can't just quit my job and become a kept woman even for you. I need to contribute something meaningful to feel like I'm building something of my own. Elliot nodded, having anticipated this conversation. What if I told you I had an idea about that? I'd say I'm listening. My company has been talking about expanding into hospitality and travel services. We've been looking for someone with industry experience to head up that division, someone who understands customer service and has real-world experience in travel logistics. Alina's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Are you offering me a job just to keep me around? I'm offering you a career opportunity that would utilize your existing skills while giving you room to grow and build something significant, Elliot corrected. The fact that it would keep you around is just a bonus. What kind of career opportunity? Vice President of Customer Experience for Grainger Industries' new travel division. You'd be responsible for developing service standards, training protocols, and customer relations strategies for everything from corporate travel to luxury vacation planning. Alina stared at him. You're serious? Completely serious. You'd report directly to the board, not to me, so there wouldn't be any conflict of interest issues. Your salary would be commensurate with the position, not with our personal relationship. And you'd have equity in the division, so if it succeeds, you'd benefit financially from that success. I don't know anything about running a division of a major corporation, Alina protested. You know about taking care of people, Elliot replied. You know about making travelers feel safe and welcome and valued. You know about handling crises with grace and turning potentially awful situations into positive experiences. Those are the skills we need, and the business management aspects can be taught. Harper had been listening to this conversation with the intensity of someone much older than 5. Does this mean Alina gets to stay with us forever? She asked. If she wants to, Elliot said, not taking his eyes off Alina's face. If she thinks she can be happy building a life with us. Alina was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the magnitude of the decision. This is all happening so fast. 3 days ago, I didn't even know you existed, and now you're offering me a family and a career and a completely different life. Sometimes the best things happen fast, Harper piped up. Like when lightning makes thunder, or when flowers bloom, or when you fall in love. Both adults looked at her in surprise. What? Harper said with a shrug. Mommy told me that love happens in all different ways. Sometimes it grows slow like trees, and sometimes it happens fast like fireworks. She said the fast kind isn't worse than the slow kind, just different. Elliot felt his heart expand in his chest. Even now, months after her death, Sarah was still guiding them, still offering wisdom, through their daughter's innocent observations. Your mommy was very smart, Alina said softly. The smartest, Harper agreed. And she would have liked you. She always said the best people are the ones who help other people find their smiles again. That did it. Alina's careful composure finally cracked completely, and she started crying in earnest. Not the quiet tears she'd shed on the balcony, but the kind of deep cleansing sobs that come when someone finally allows themselves to hope for something they'd thought was impossible. Is that a yes? Harper asked with concern. Are those happy tears or sad tears? Happy tears, Alina managed between sobs. Definitely happy tears. Elliot pulled both of them into his arms, and for the first time in 18 months, he felt like his family was complete. Not the same as it had been with Sarah, but whole in a new way. As they held each other in the middle of the airport lounge, travelers streaming around them with their own stories of departures and arrivals. Elliot realized that sometimes the most important journeys don't involve going anywhere at all. Sometimes they involve standing still and letting love find you. The flight back to New York was different from any trip they'd taken before. Harper chattered excitedly about showing Alina their apartment, introducing her to her stuffed animals, and teaching her all the games she and Sarah used to play together. She seemed to have no anxiety about blending her old life with her new reality, accepting the addition of Alina with the remarkable adaptability of children. "Will you sleep in the guest room or in Daddy's room?" Harper asked, with the directness that made adults squirm. "The guest room," Alina said quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Your daddy and I are still getting to know each other, sweetheart." "But you love each other, right?" Harper pressed. "I can tell because you look at each other the same way Mommy and Daddy used to look at each other." Elliot felt his own cheeks warm. "Harper, honey, grown-up relationships are complicated." "No, they're not," Harper interrupted with 5-year-old logic. "Either you love someone or you don't. And if you love someone and they love you back, then you should be together. That's what Mommy always said." Over Harper's head, Elliot caught Alina's eye and saw his own amazement reflected there. Somehow their daughter had distilled the complexity of adult relationships down to its essential truth with the clarity that only comes from complete innocence. "You're right," Alina said softly. "It really is that simple, isn't it?" "Everything's simple when you stop being scared," Harper announced with the confidence of someone who had recently learned this lesson herself. As the plane soared over the Pacific toward their new life together, Elliot reflected on how much had changed since that first flight to Tokyo. He'd boarded that plane as a desperate father trying to save his daughter from drowning in grief. Now he was returning as a man who had rediscovered love, hope, and the possibility of happiness he'd thought was lost forever. But more than that, he was returning with a family. Not the family he'd lost, but the family they'd found in the most unexpected place imaginable, 30,000 feet above the earth, where angels lived in the clouds and miracles happened to people who were brave enough to believe in them. The hardest part was over. They'd found each other, chosen each other, committed to building something beautiful together. Now came the real work of turning that commitment into a life day by day, choice by choice, love by love. As Harper fell asleep between them, her head pillowed on Alina's shoulder and her small hand reaching across the aisle to hold Elliot's, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because sometimes when you stop looking for happiness and start living it, you discover that the love you thought you'd lost forever was just waiting in a different form, delivered by an angel disguised as a flight attendant who believed that miracles were just another word for love, refusing to give up. 6 months later, Elliot stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the first snowfall of winter dust the city in pristine white. The apartment that had felt like a mausoleum for 18 months now hummed with life. Harper's laughter echoing from the kitchen, where she and Alina were attempting to bake cookies, the sound of music playing softly from speakers that had been silent since Sarah's death. The warm glow of lights that stayed on past sunset, because there were people here who wanted to see each other's faces. The transformation hadn't been seamless. There had been difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and the inevitable growing pains of blending two lives into something new. Alina had started her position as Vice President of Customer Experience 6 weeks ago, and while she was thriving in the role, the adjustment to corporate life had been challenging. She'd called him in tears after her first board meeting, convinced she was in over her head, certain that everyone could see she didn't belong in the marble corridors of Granger Industries. But she'd persevered, bringing a perspective to their customer service initiatives that no MBA could have provided. Her ideas about treating every client interaction as a chance to create connection, rather than just complete transactions, had revolutionized their approach to business development. The travel division she was building was already exceeding projections, and more importantly, she came home each day energized rather than drained, excited to tell them about the challenges she was solving and the team she was building. Harper's adjustment had been more complex. The initial euphoria of having Alina in their lives had given way to deeper questions as the reality of their new family structure settled in. There had been nightmares about losing another mother, moments of testing Alina's commitment, and heartbreaking conversations about loyalty to Sarah's memory. But through it all, Alina had remained steady, patient, and honest about her own uncertainties. "I'm not trying to replace your first mommy," she'd told Harper during one particularly difficult evening when the little girl had dissolved into tears after a classmate asked why she had a fake mommy now. "I'm just trying to love you the best way I know how, and learning how to be part of your family without taking anything away from the love you have for her." "But what if I forget her?" Harper had sobbed. "What if I love you so much that I can't remember what she looked like anymore?" Alina had held her close, stroking her hair with the same gentle rhythm Sarah used to use. "Love doesn't work that way, sweetheart. Love grows bigger when you add more people to it, but it never gets smaller. Your heart is big enough for both of us, and your first mommy would be so proud that you're brave enough to let someone new love you." Now watching Harper stand on a stool beside Alina as they decorated sugar cookies with elaborate designs, Elliot marveled at how natural their relationship had become. They had their own jokes, their own rituals, their own way of communicating that didn't require words. Harper had started calling Alina Mommy Lena, a compromise that honored both her need for a maternal figure and her loyalty to Sarah's memory. It was perfectly Harper, perfectly them. "Daddy," Harper called from the kitchen. "Come see what we made." Elliot walked into the kitchen to find the marble island covered with what appeared to be dozens of misshapen cookies, decorated with enough frosting and sprinkles to supply a small bakery. Harper and Alina were both covered in flour and wearing matching aprons that read, "Kiss the Cook," a gag gift from Harper that had somehow become their official baking uniform. "We made cookies for everyone," Harper announced proudly. "There's one for you, and one for me, and one for Mommy Lena, and one for Mommy in Heaven, and one for Grandma Granger, and one for Abuela Torres." "Abuela Torres?" Elliot asked, raising an eyebrow at Alina. She flushed slightly. "I may have been FaceTiming with my parents while we were baking. Harper insisted on meeting them, and now she's convinced we need to send cookies to El Salvador." "Can we, Daddy?" Harper asked, bouncing slightly on her stool. "Abuela Torres said she's never had American sugar cookies, and I want to show her that I'm a good baker like Mommy Lena." The casual way Harper referred to Alina's parents as her grandparents made Elliot's chest tight with emotion. In 6 months, his daughter had not only accepted Alina into their family, but had embraced the extended network of people who came with her. She'd absorbed Spanish words into her vocabulary, learned to make pupusas from a FaceTime tutorial with Alina's mother, and proudly announced to her kindergarten class that she now had grandparents in 3 different countries. "Of course we can send cookies to El Salvador," Elliot said, lifting Harper off her stool and spinning her around, making her squeal with delight. "But I think we should probably make a fresh batch. These look like they might not survive international shipping." "Hey," Alina protested, laughing. "Our cookies are perfectly good. They're just artistically rustic." "Is that what we're calling it?" Elliot teased, setting Harper down and moving to stand beside Alina. Even after 6 months being close to her still made his pulse quicken. She was wearing one of his old Columbia t-shirts under her apron, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she had a smudge of green frosting on her cheek. She'd never looked more beautiful. "I think they're perfect," Harper declared loyally. "Perfect cookies for our perfect family." The word perfect hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Their family wasn't perfect in any traditional sense. They were a widowed father, his traumatized daughter, and a woman who'd appeared in their lives like an answered prayer. But somehow, despite all the ways they didn't fit conventional definitions, they worked. They loved each other with the fierce protectiveness of people who'd almost lost everything, and the grateful joy of people who'd been given an unexpected second chance. "Speaking of our family," Elliot said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something I wanted to discuss with both of you." Harper perked up immediately. "Is it a surprise? I love surprises." "It might be," Elliot said, pulling out a small velvet box that made Alina's eyes go wide. "But first, I want to ask you both a question." "Oh my God," Alina whispered, her hand flying to her throat. "Are you going to ask Mommy Lena to marry us?" Harper asked with the directness that never ceased to amaze him. Elliot looked at his daughter, then at the woman who had transformed their lives simply by believing in angels. "Actually, I was thinking we should ask her together. What do you think, Harper? Should we make Mommy Lena an official part of our family?" Harper clapped her hands together, bouncing on her toes. "Yes, yes, yes. Can I help with the asking?" "I was hoping you would," Elliot said, handing Harper the ring box. "This was your idea as much as mine." Harper took the box with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object, then looked up at Alina with shining eyes. "Mommy Lena, will you marry me and Daddy and be our forever family?" Alina was crying now, happy tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked between Elliot and Harper. "Are you sure, both of you? Because once I say yes, I'm never letting either of you go." "We're sure," Elliot said, his own voice thick with emotion. "We've been sure since Tokyo. We just wanted to give ourselves time to prove it." "And we did prove it," Harper added seriously. "We love each other when we're happy, and when we're sad, and when we're fighting about vegetables. That's what real families do." Alina knelt down so she was at eye level with Harper. "Before I answer, I need to tell you both something important. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. You've given me a family I never thought I'd have, and a future I never thought I deserved. But I need you to know that saying yes means we're all promising to take care of each other, even when it's hard. Even when we disagree. Even when the world tries to tell us we don't make sense together." "Even when you have to travel for work?" Harper asked. "Even when I have to travel for work," Alina confirmed. "Though I promise those trips will be as short as possible." "Even when Daddy gets stressed about business stuff," Harper continued. "Even when Daddy gets stressed about business stuff." Alina agreed, glancing at Elliot with a small smile. "Even when I have bad dreams about Mommy." Harper's voice got smaller. Alina's expression softened. "Especially when you have bad dreams about Mommy. Because she's part of our family too, sweetheart. She always will be. And I promise to help you remember her and talk about her and keep her love alive in our hearts." Harper nodded solemnly, then looked at her father. "Daddy, do you promise to not work so much that you miss important stuff?" "I promise," Elliot said, without hesitation. "I promise to remember that you and Mommy Lena are more important than any deal, any meeting, any crisis that isn't actually life or death." "And Mommy Lena," Harper turned back to Alina, "do you promise to not leave us, even if we make you really mad sometimes?" "I promise," Alina said firmly. "I promise to stay and fight for us to talk through problems instead of running away, and to choose this family every single day." Then yes, Harper announced, opening the ring box with a flourish. Yes, we want to marry you and be forever family. Elliot took the ring from the box, a simple but elegant solitaire that sparkled in the kitchen lights, and slipped it onto Alina's trembling finger. Alina Torres, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you've made us? Yes, Alina whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. Harper shrieked with delight, launching herself into both of their arms and nearly knocking them all to the floor. They stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the chaos of their cookie-making adventure, holding each other and laughing and crying, all at the same time. When can we have the wedding? Harper asked, her face pressed between theirs. Can I be the flower girl? Can we have it in a garden so Mommy's angels can watch? Can Abuela and Abuelo Torres come from El Salvador? Slow down, sweetheart, Elliot laughed. We just got engaged 5 minutes ago. But I want everyone to know we're forever family now, Harper protested. How about this? Alina said, still wiping tears from her cheeks. What if we have a small ceremony here in New York, with just our closest friends and family, and then we have a big celebration in El Salvador, so all my relatives can meet you and Daddy? Harper's eyes lit up. Can I learn to dance salsa for the El Salvador party? I insist on it, Alina laughed. Every Torres family celebration requires dancing. As they began planning their future together, moving from the kitchen to the living room, where they could spread out on the comfortable sofa, Elliot marveled at how effortlessly they'd become a unit. Harper curled up between them, chattering excitedly about wedding dresses and flower arrangements, while Alina listened with complete attention, and Elliot found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't since Sarah's death. This was what happiness felt like, he realized. Not the manic highs of business success or the desperate relief of crisis averted, but this quiet contentment of being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the right people. It was Sarah's favorite kind of evening, family time with no agenda beyond being together, and he knew she would have loved seeing Harper so joyful, so secure in the knowledge that she was cherished. I have an idea, Harper announced suddenly, sitting up straighter on the sofa. Can we go visit Mommy tomorrow and tell her about the engagement? Elliot's throat tightened. They visited Sarah's grave once a month, usually just the two of them, and it was always emotionally difficult. Harper would chatter to the headstone, as if Sarah were sitting right there updating her mother on everything happening in their lives, while Elliot struggled with guilt and grief and the constant feeling that he was somehow betraying his wife's memory by moving forward without her. I think that's a beautiful idea, Alina said softly, if your daddy is comfortable with it. Elliot looked at her, surprised by the offer. In 6 months, Alina had never pushed to be included in their monthly visits to the cemetery. She'd offered to come if he wanted her there, but she'd never suggested it herself, understanding instinctively that it was sacred time between him and Harper and Sarah's memory. Are you sure? He asked. It might be difficult. I'm sure, Alina said firmly. If I'm going to be Harper's stepmother, then I need to honor her first mother too. I need to make my own peace with Sarah, and I need her blessing even if I have to ask for it at a grave. Harper clapped her hands together. Yes, Mommy needs to meet Mommy Lena properly, and I can tell her all about the engagement and show her my bridesmaid dress. Flower girl dress, Elliot corrected gently. Bridesmaid, Harper insisted. I'm not a little kid anymore. I'm almost 6, and I'm going to have very important jobs at the wedding. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for their unusual family outing. They drove to Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, where Sarah was buried beneath a simple granite headstone surrounded by oak trees that would bloom magnificently in the spring. Harper chattered nervously during the drive, her excitement about introducing Alina to her mother mixing with the anxiety she always felt before these visits. As they walked across the frost-covered grass toward Sarah's grave, Harper slipped her small hand into Alina's. "What if she doesn't like you?" she asked in a small voice. "Then I'll have to work harder to earn her approval," Alina replied seriously. "But I have a feeling she'll like anyone who loves you and your daddy as much as I do." Sarah's grave was exactly as they'd left it the month before, neat and well-tended with fresh flowers from the cemetery's maintenance crew and a small American flag left by some unknown visitor who remembered that Sarah had served briefly in the Peace Corps before meeting Elliot. Harper immediately knelt beside the headstone, her hands pressed flat against the cold granite. "Hi, Mommy," she said, in her clear, sweet voice. "I brought someone to meet you. This is Mommy Lena, and she's going to marry Daddy and be my stepmother. But don't worry. I told her all about you, and she knows you're still my first mommy and always will be." Elliot felt his chest tighten as he watched his daughter have a conversation with Sarah's memory, while Alina knelt respectfully beside her, her head bowed as if she were in church. "She makes really good pancakes," Harper continued, "but not as good as yours. And she sings me to sleep sometimes when I have bad dreams about missing you. And she helps Daddy remember to eat dinner instead of just working all the time." Alina reached out tentatively, placing her hand on the headstone beside Harper's. "Sarah," she said softly, "I know you don't know me, but I want you to know that I love your daughter and your husband more than my own life. I promise to take care of them, to honor your memory, and to make sure Harper never forgets how much you loved her." "Tell her about the ring, Mommy Lena," Harper urged. Alina smiled through her tears, holding up her left hand so the diamond caught the morning sunlight. "Elliot asked me to marry him yesterday, and I said yes. We're going to have a wedding in the spring, and Harper is going to be our bridesmaid. I hope you would approve. I hope you would trust me to love them the way they deserve to be loved." For a moment, the cemetery was perfectly silent, except for the rustle of wind through the bare oak branches. Then Harper stood up, brushing frost from her knees, and announced with complete confidence, "She says yes. Mommy says she's happy we found each other, and she wants us to be forever family." Elliot looked at his daughter, then at Alina, then at Sarah's grave. He couldn't hear his wife's voice the way Harper seemed to, but he felt something. A lightness in his chest, a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since her death. Maybe it was just his own conscience finally granting him permission to be happy, or maybe it was something more. Either way, it felt like blessing. "Thank you," he whispered to the headstone, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking Sarah for. For Harper, obviously. For the 7 years they'd had together. For teaching him what love could be. But maybe also for somehow leading them to Alina, for orchestrating a meeting that felt too perfect to be mere coincidence. As they walked back to the car, Harper skipping ahead while describing the wedding ceremony she was already planning in elaborate detail, Alina slipped her hand into Elliot's. "That went better than I expected," she said quietly. "Did you really think she might not approve?" Elliot asked. "I thought she might be jealous," Alina admitted, "or worried that I was trying to replace her. But Harper's right. There's room in our hearts for all the love we need to carry." The wedding planning consumed the next 4 months in the most delightful way possible. Harper threw herself into every detail with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting her entire short life for a reason to celebrate, while Alina navigated the complexities of blending their social circles with the same grace she brought to managing difficult airline passengers. Elliot found himself enjoying the process more than he'd expected, particularly the moments when Harper and Alina would present him with some new plan that was simultaneously ridiculous and perfect. We need butterfly releases, Harper announced one evening in February, looking up from the bridal magazine she'd been studying with scientific intensity. And a cake shaped like an airplane. And dancing horses. Dancing horses? Elliot asked, trying to keep a straight face. For the reception. Mommy Lena said her cousin in El Salvador has dancing horses. Those are trained horses that perform at festivals, Alina clarified, laughing. And I don't think they'd appreciate the flight to New York. Then we'll have dancing people instead, Harper decided pragmatically. But definitely butterfly releases. Mommy always said butterflies carry messages to heaven. In the end, they compromised on everything. The ceremony would be small and intimate, held in the conservatory garden at the New York Botanical Garden, with only their closest friends and family present. Harper would indeed be a bridesmaid, wearing a dress she'd helped design that was sophisticated enough to make her feel grown up, but playful enough to allow for easy movement during her planned performance of the salsa routine Alina's mother had taught her over FaceTime. The guest list was an interesting study in the unexpected ways life brings people together. Elliot's business associates mixed with Alina's airline colleagues, while Harper's kindergarten classmates played with the children of Alina's extended family, who'd flown in from El Salvador. Sarah's parents were there too, having traveled from Oregon to witness the wedding of the man their daughter had loved, and the woman who was helping their granddaughter heal. Sarah would have loved her, Margaret Whitman whispered to Elliot, as they watched Alina help Harper adjust her flower crown before the ceremony. She always said the best people are the ones who make other people braver. The ceremony itself was everything Elliot hadn't known he wanted. Simple, heartfelt, and infused with the kind of joy that comes from people who've survived loss and found their way back to hope. Harper performed her bridesmaid duties with the utmost seriousness, walking down the aisle, scattering rose petals while humming the wedding march under her breath. When Elliot and Alina exchanged vows, they spoke not just to each other, but to their unconventional family and the future they were building together. I promise to love you not as a replacement for what we lost, but as a new chapter in our story. Elliot said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. I promise to choose you every day to build a life with you that honors both our past and our future. I promise to love Harper as if she were born from my own heart, while never forgetting she was born from another woman's love first, Alina replied. I promise to help you both remember that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stay, who choose to fight for each other, who choose to build something beautiful from whatever pieces they're given. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Harper cheered so loudly that the entire wedding party burst into laughter. As Elliot kissed his new wife while their daughter danced around them in celebration, he realized that this was what Sarah would have wanted for them. Not a preservation of their old life like a museum exhibit, but a living, growing, joy-filled future that proved love could multiply rather than diminish. The reception was held in a private dining room at the Peninsula Hotel, a choice that felt symbolically perfect given where their love story had begun. Harper gave a toast that brought everyone to tears, thanking Alina for teaching Daddy how to smile real smiles again, and announcing her intention to be the best big sister ever when they had babies. Babies? Elliot asked Alina quietly, as they swayed together during their first dance as husband and wife. Is that something you'd want? She asked, her eyes sparkling with possibilities. More children. With you everything. As the evening wound down and their guests began to say their goodbyes, Harper curled up in Alina's lap, exhausted from the excitement, but glowing with contentment. Are we really forever family now? She asked sleepily. Forever and always, Alina confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of Harper's head. Nothing can change that now. Good, Harper murmured, her eyes drifting closed. I was getting tired of being sad all the time. 2 years later, Elliot stood once again at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan penthouse, but this time he wasn't alone. 18-month-old Santiago Granger Torres babbled happily from his high chair, while Harper, now 7 and wise beyond her years, helped Alina prepare breakfast in the kitchen that had once been a showcase and was now the heart of their home. The travel division Alina had built was now the fastest-growing segment of Granger Industries, and she'd recently been promoted to senior vice president with her own corner office and a team of 12 people. Harper was thriving in second-grade bilingual and confident and bursting with stories about her little brother, her school friends, and the upcoming visit from Abuela and Abuelo Torres. Santiago had been a surprise. A wonderful, overwhelming, life-changing surprise that had completed their family in ways none of them had anticipated. He was a perfect blend of all of them, with Elliot's dark hair, Alina's warm brown eyes, and Harper's irrepressible personality. More importantly, he was living proof that love could indeed multiply rather than divide, that adding new family members only made their hearts grow larger. "Daddy, come help," Harper called from the kitchen. "Santiago is trying to eat his oatmeal with his feet again." Elliot laughed, abandoning his morning coffee to rescue his son from his own culinary creativity. As he lifted the sticky, giggling baby from his high chair, Santiago grabbed a fistful of his father's tie and babbled something that sounded suspiciously like "dada." "Did he just say his first word?" Alina asked excitedly, pausing in her preparation of Harper's school lunch. "I think so," Elliot said, his heart swelling with pride. "Say it again, buddy. Say dada." "Mama," Santiago said, clearly reaching for Alina with his oatmeal-covered hands. Harper dissolved into giggles. He's so smart, he knows exactly who spoils him the most. As they ate breakfast together, Harper chattering about her upcoming school presentation on family trees, Alina reviewing her notes for a morning board meeting, Santiago making a spectacular mess with his finger foods. Elliot reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years ago, he'd been a broken man, barely surviving his wife's death and his daughter's trauma. Now he was part of a chaotic, loving, absolutely perfect family that bore no resemblance to any life he could have planned or imagined. They'd been through challenges together. Alina's difficult pregnancy with Santiago, Harper's struggles with jealousy when the baby was born, Elliot's ongoing efforts to balance his career ambitions with his family commitments. But they'd faced every obstacle as a team, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together during the good ones. "I have to go soon," Alina said, glancing at her watch. "The board meeting starts at 9 and I want to review my presentation one more time." "What's the presentation about?" Harper asked, carefully wiping Santiago's face with a damp cloth while he squirmed in his high chair. "We're proposing to expand the travel division internationally," Alina explained. "If the board approves it, we might be opening offices in London, Tokyo, and maybe even San Salvador." "Will you have to travel a lot?" Harper's voice carried just a hint of the old anxiety that sometimes surfaced when she was reminded that the adults in her life had responsibilities beyond their family. "Some," Alina said honestly, "but never for more than a few days at a time, and never without making sure you and Santiago and Daddy have everything you need while I'm gone." "And video calls every night," Harper said, reciting what had become their standard travel protocol. "And video calls every night," Alina confirmed. As Alina gathered her briefcase and kissed everyone goodbye, Elliot marveled at how seamlessly they'd learned to navigate the complexities of 2 demanding careers and 2 children. It wasn't always easy, but it worked because they'd all committed to making it work, to prioritizing their family bond above individual convenience. "Daddy," Harper said, as they watched Alina's car pull away from the building, "do you think Mommy Sarah knows about Santiago?" The question caught him off guard, as Harper's observations often did. She still talked about Sarah regularly, but usually in the context of memories or traditions they wanted to maintain. References to Sarah watching over their current lives were less common now, though they still happened at unexpected moments. "What makes you ask, sweetheart?" "Because yesterday at school, Mrs. Peterson asked us to draw pictures of our families, and I drew all of us. You and me and Mommy Lena and Santiago and Mommy Sarah watching from a cloud. And then I got sad because I realized Santiago will never meet her, not really." Elliot set Santiago down in his playpen and knelt beside Harper's chair, trying to find words that would comfort her without dismissing her feelings. "You're right, that Santiago will never meet Mommy Sarah the way you did," he said carefully. "But you know what, he'll know her through all the stories you tell him about her, and through all the ways she's still part of who you are, who I am, who our whole family is. How is she part of Santiago? He's not her baby." "No, but he's your baby brother, and you're her daughter, so all the love she gave you, all the kindness and creativity and joy she taught you, you're passing that on to Santiago every day. In a way, she's helping raise him too, just through you." Harper considered this seriously, then brightened. "So it's like Mommy Sarah is Santiago's angel grandmother, watching out for him from heaven, while Abuela Torres takes care of him on earth." "Exactly like that." "That's good," Harper said with satisfaction. "Everyone needs angel grandmothers." Later that evening, after Harper had gone to bed, and Santiago was sleeping peacefully in his crib, Elliot and Alina sat together on their living room sofa, sharing a bottle of wine and debriefing their respective days. Alina's presentation had been a resounding success with the board, approving her international expansion plan and authorizing her to begin the process of establishing overseas offices. "Congratulations," Elliot said, raising his glass in a toast. "Senior Vice President Torres is about to become a global executive." "Senior Vice President Granger Torres," she corrected with a smile. "And I couldn't have done it without my family supporting me every step of the way." "Are you nervous about the increased travel requirements?" "A little," Alina admitted, "but also excited. This is everything I dreamed about when I was working as a flight attendant, sending most of my paycheck to my parents and wondering if I'd ever have a real career. Now I get to build something meaningful while still being present for the people I love most." "You know what I realized today?" Elliot said, settling back against the sofa cushions. 4 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be married to a woman I met on an airplane raising 2 children in a house that's never quiet, and running a business with someone who challenges every decision I make, I would have thought they were describing someone else's life. "Good, different, or bad different?" Alina asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "The best different," Elliot said without hesitation. "Sarah and I used to talk about the life we wanted to build together, and it was beautiful but predictable. Safe. This life we've built is nothing like what I planned, but it's everything I never knew I needed. No. I love you," Alina said, simply settling against his shoulder. "I love you too. All of you. This whole chaotic, wonderful, impossible family we've somehow created." As they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their sleeping children and watching the city lights twinkle beyond their windows, Elliot thought about the flight attendant who had knelt beside a grieving child and offered her a cracker made with love. He thought about the woman who had agreed to stay in Tokyo for 3 days and ended up staying for a lifetime. He thought about the mother who sang lullabies in Spanish and English, who helped Harper remember Sarah while building new memories of their own. Most of all, he thought about the miracle of second chances of love that appears when you least expect it and proves that happy endings aren't just for fairy tales. Sometimes they happen to real people in real life delivered by angels disguised as flight attendants who believe that love never really disappears. It just finds new ways to reveal itself to hearts brave enough to recognize it. In the baby monitor, Santiago stirred and made soft babbling sounds before settling back into sleep. Down the hall, Harper talked quietly to her stuffed animals, probably retelling them the story of how their family came to be. And in the living room, Elliot held his wife close and marveled at the beautiful, complicated, absolutely perfect life they'd built together from the pieces of who they used to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new reasons to be grateful for the love they'd found at 30,000 feet above the earth. But tonight was perfect exactly as it was. A family safe in their home, bound together by choice and commitment, and the kind of love that proves miracles happen every day to people who are ready to believe in them. The silence that had once threatened to consume them was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the everyday sounds of a life fully lived. And high above the city, if you knew where to look, you might glimpse the angels who watch over families like theirs. Families built not from loss, but from the courage to love again, to trust again, to believe that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the words, "I wasn't supposed to stay." But stay she did. And in staying, Alina Torres had given them all the greatest gift imaginable. Proof that love once awakened never truly ends. It just keeps finding new ways to take flight.